Alrighty, thanks for coming tonight, everyone. Great to have everyone here. So this is our interviewing workshop. So I'll start off kind of just a bit of an outline of tonight. So to kick it off, we'll have a talk from Potentia. Avinash from Potentia is here to talk about tech, working in tech, recruitment, all of that. Then we'll talk about job opportunities, so how you actually get to the interviewing stage. Then we're going to talk behavioral interviewing and technical interviewing, so what to do once you have an interview, how to translate that into a job offer. So before we kick off as well, just like to thank our sponsors. So our gold sponsors, Potentia, FNZ, and Centrality. And then our silver sponsors, Serato, Zero, Optiva, and Atlassian. All right, and now I'd like to invite Avinash up to talk a little bit.
Thanks so much, Ian. Couple of things. A way of housekeeping. I just want to figure out what the hell are you guys doing here on Easter Thursday evening? What's wrong with you guys? I spent about 10 years in various universities across the world, and I would have never done this. So I take my hat off, and I think you guys need to applaud yourselves. But before you do that, I think you need to recognize the executive committee for our DEVS society and what these guys are doing, and I think they deserve an applause. I come from Potentia Recruitment. We are the premier tech recruitment organization in Auckland, very top in New Zealand. We've been around for about 17 years, and we niche placing folks like yourself into roles in organizations that we have networked with over the last 17 years. I myself have been in the organization for the last 7 years, but prior to that, for the last 20 odd years, I was on the other side as a hiring manager. So I hired folks like yourselves into tech roles in organizations which were more enterprising, looking after large shops. And most recently, my role was with an entity called Health Alliance, which was looking after the IT recruitment, the services for the 4 district health boards that make the northern region of New Zealand. And we had close to 500 odd IT folk, folks from looking after the service desk right out to development and into supporting the environment in what was considered and is known as the largest IT shop in this country. And that's where I come from. And most recently, I have kind of branched more into tech startups, and we are intimately involved in the tech startup ecosystem in New Zealand. So if there was one takeaway from this evening that I want you to go home with, I want you to kind of ask yourselves this fundamental question. Do you want to be a wage slave for the rest of your lives? Because I don't think you deserve to be one. And I think Liam will talk to this. We have had a long discussion with him, and young Wesley is out here as well, and others, where we have recently had this chat that, you know what, the world before you at this moment in human history gives you the opportunity to do things that might not necessarily be based on the axioms of life pre-COVID. If I was talking to you 2 years ago, I would suggest to you perhaps an opportunity interviewing and putting your hands up and kind of joining a big 4 or a big 5. I'm talking about Deloitte, KPMG, PricewaterhouseCoopers, Ernst & Young, or maybe McKinsey. As a technology advisory service consultant would be the go-to destination. I absolutely encourage you to do that pre-COVID. COVID has given us an opportunity to really look at where we position ourselves. And I say to you, and I encourage you to ask yourself the fundamental question, do you want to take a bit more risk whilst you're still at home with your mom and dad, and the ability for you to work out of your garages, to try something. You know, the ideas you have in your head or in your teams, to see whether we can try it out as a startup, be entrepreneurial, and if it works, good, well and good. But if it does not, for whatever reason, it is not a failure. It is an opportunity for you to have learned entrepreneurial skills that will set you up for a better future on the basis of the fact that those enterprises and other organizations that are looking at hiring you will be asking that question. It will surface in the interview process. Are you entrepreneurial? So you cannot fail regardless. And the reason I surfaced that so early in this conversation is on the basis of, if I was sitting in the seat that you are sitting in, and if the question was asked of me, my question 20 years ago, or 10 years ago, or 15 years ago, what would I do differently from where you are sitting now? That is the one thing that I'll do differently. And I talk from a podium of somebody who has been through what you guys are going through now, and somebody who has ended up in a tech space for the last 25 years as a hiring manager. And I tell you what, this is the most amazing time in human history. You guys are in the midst of some significant disruption that is happening in real time before our eyes. We kind of faked our way through a lot of this pre-COVID. We kind of created scenarios which gave us an opportunity to kind of think differently or try to think differently. You guys, at this moment in human history, are living that. You guys are in the midst of the most amazing disruptions that have happened in the last 12 months that no experiment by any entity would have been able to create. Just think for a moment. You have the ability to create a future that your peers and those before you did not have. You are in the midst of an amazing time in human history. So the challenge that you have, and as you navigate the next phase of your life, is to ask yourself that question, is to fast forward yourself 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, frame what good looks like for you personally, and then ask yourself the question as to what you need to do from today to be able to achieve what your 5-year, your 10-year, or your 15-year horizon looks like. Reverse engineer the things you need to be doing today to be able to get there. So in that context, let me ask you one question. How many of you are freshmen? Can you put your show of hands? First year students. How many sophomores? How many second year students? How many third year? How many grad students? Honors, masters, any PhDs here? Smart guy. I just ask you this because it is very important for us to kind of try to frame the way we navigate this for the next period of our lives. I see as a recruiter, very often we see folk who turn up to us and ask us the question about internships. And you know, it is extremely embarrassing when we see folk turn up in our offices and ask us in about October, November, or December sometimes that they are seeking an internship. And the question I ask of them, why did you not start doing this when you started your time at university? And the comment and the feedback we usually get is we did not know. We did not know that we needed to start early. We did not know how to do it. And we did not know who to talk to. The club that you are members of is an awesome club because we have created 3 years ago on the back of a whiteboard session we had in our office downtown, which is just around the corner from here. And you can't see it tonight? No, thank God it's not. Because we had a deep and meaningful over a few beers and we said to Sukans, what is that thing that would really help students on campus to get meaningful internships and meaningful employment once they get into that tech space. And we thought we'd create a club, of which you guys are members now, to help kind of bridge that gap. That academia kind of creates an amazing opportunity for yourselves to learn the hard skills in the way you do, but it does not help you or train you to be able to connect with industry, which is literally at the bottom of the hill. You guys are at the top of the hill, literally up here, and the rest, where you're going to end up is in jobs is down the hill. So our productive moment was to see how we can close the gap. How can we get industry to meet academia in a neutral space, in a neutral way, in a way that is positive for both parties. And that's how the DEVS Society was created 3 years ago. And we at Potential Recruitment underwrote the whole experiment. And in the first year, there was an experiment that said, if it does not work, we can always park it and we don't have to continue. But it is with a lot of pride that we stand before you here today. And we are having this conversation on the basis of the fact that it has been humongously successful. And the work that the executive committee has done this year, the year before, and the year before that, has been awesome to kind of create the pathways to make this happen. One of the lessons that we have learned through this experiment that you guys need to be aware of is that whilst the university will teach you some of those significant skills in the hard skills space for you to be able to have that so you can tick it off, the jobs that you end up in and the interview process that you go through to achieve those jobs is not because of the hard skills. The fact that you guys have come through the schooling system to end up at a university, the fact that you end up with a GPA, which may range, and we have seen it range from 2.0, sometimes up to 8.9 and 9, is a given. We as hiring managers, we know that you guys are the ones who put their hands up to participate in this process at the peak of the pyramid. That will not get you a job. What gets you a job is those other skills that you build through these kind of events, the extracurricular activities, the soft skills. And the questions that more and more is being asked by hiring managers for the interview process is, okay, I know that you got a GPA of 7 or 8 or 9. Let's park there for a moment. It is asked, share with us your GitHub. Share with us your extracurricular activities. Share with us your personal projects. Because those tend to be generally more contemporary. They're more related to what industry is expecting you to do, as opposed to the rather archaic processes of going through a curriculum which takes a long time for the universities to pivot. In order for you, for the university to change and make its curriculum contemporary, it needs to go through an accreditation process, and that process can take anything up to 3 years. And those statistics I can share with you on the basis of the fact that I'm very close to the School of Computer Science here, and in Victoria University, and in the University of Canterbury, and in Otago. We provide advisory services. We know that his industry wanting folk to start kind of thinking quantum computing, for example. And we come back up the hill to the university and we say, what is your plans to incorporate quantum computing into the curriculum? And the university will share with us the fact that it will take a few years for it to be accredited. you do not want, you want to learn, you want to have the basis of the foundations that the university teaches, which is really admirable, but you need to make sure that you also are here in this world that talks about the future, where the hiring managers are talking about your ability to be in concert or in symbiosis with where the industry is at that stage, which tends to be, there's an element of latency. And latency is on the basis of the fact that it takes a period of time for the universities to accredit itself to be able to deliver you those courses. And the way to overcome that latency and close the gap is around doing your personal projects. Your personal projects then is working with either through internships or through micro-credentialing or micro-internships. Wesley here is a classic example of somebody who has gone through the process of micro-credentialing himself in software testing, which got him into a micro-internship at an enterprise where he was able to experience that and as a result end up in a decent job with a zero inertia in the process. For yourselves, most of you will end up with a job. That's a given. But will that be the job that is your passion? Is that what you want to turn up every morning for the week to deliver? I see a lot of people who wait for hump day. Familiar with hump day? No? Anybody familiar with hump day?
Is that Wednesday?
Wednesday evening is an amazing time for most of the people who are in this thing called work. They wait for hump day because, it's the peak, because it's all downhill from there. They wait for Thursday, it's going down. They wait for Friday, I'm going to get on the piss by lunchtime. And by Friday afternoon, I'm out of here. And then Sunday, about midday, starts to churn in your stomach. I have to go to that place and I have to work. And folk hate it. There's more people who hate their jobs than love their jobs. Because they have to go to this place called work, and they have to go and do this thing with these people that they don't like. And they have to be in the close proximity with these people. My challenge to yourselves is, pursue your passion. Make your jobs your hobby. You need to understand what your passion is first, and then you create and craft an opportunity that allows you to do something where you monetize your time doing things that you love. Because you know what? You are awake more hours with folk that you work with than with your loved ones. You spend more time awake with your workmates than those you might prefer to live with your loved ones. You might turn up at 8 o'clock in the morning, you go through this thing until 5 or 6 in the evening, you go home, you have dinner, you maybe wait for a while, and you go to bed, and you wake up the next morning, you do this again. And I see way too often people who hate doing what they do. I was one of those for many years. I kind of faked it. I put on a brave face every Monday morning as I turned up to this place for work, and I smiled, and I was like, oh God, what am I doing here? And I was looking for hump day. Then I was all down there. Friday, by lunchtime, I was already on the tips. And by Friday evening, I was home, and I was partying. And then Sunday, I used to get this thing in my stomach. I've got to go back to that place. You don't need to do that. You have within your ability to create a future pursuing what you love. You must do that. And one of those things that the term that is emerging in the recent times, especially post-COVID, is this term called wage slavery. You guys familiar with that term? Turning up to a job to just get paid. There was slavery in the olden days. Some would say that it's still contemporary in many societies. We still have slavery. But in our society now, going to work for an enterprise that pays you because you need the money to have a good time or to pay for the car that you purchased or for the home you're about to buy is wage slavery. And the challenge I put to you again is if you can help it and if you can plan for it, please do not end up in a stage where you are a wage slave. Because it is within your ability to do that. You are the smartest of the smart. There's a lot of people out there in other institutions of education who may not be as privileged as you are. You are born into privilege. You embrace privilege. And the reason I can say that is because I come from Fiji, and how many of you have been to Fiji for a vacation? Oh, I see about 10% here. So you might have ended up in a hotel. Folk come and serve you drinks. You have an amazing time, you party afterwards, and you go to bed. And those folk who served you in those hotels, they go across the road to their homes, and their homes are shanty towns. They are most probably extremely poor. Within that society, there's another sub-society of abject poverty. People who are the poorest of the poor. That's where I come from. I was born there. And it was a small nudge that happened in my life that gave me the opportunity to be standing in front of you and having this conversation today, in the midst of privilege. And I sometimes pinch myself to say that, you know what, I can speak your language. Although you may not be able to understand my accent, but I hope you can. But I tell you what, I talk to people in my community and they go, I can't believe you. That you, if I go back to Fiji now, and I go back to my village, and I talk to them, and I tell them I was in the midst of you, they will say, seriously? They would not believe me. But I have had the privilege on the basis of a little nudge. You are already born here in a society that embraces and allows you to be the best you can be because you were already born with the delta from where I come from. So the productive moment for yourselves in the world of the future, which is now no longer linear. Your equation is not y equals mx plus c. Yours is a language that talks to calculus, which talks about y equals ax to the power. You are exponential. You have the ability to truly go exponential. And the next level of exponentiality talks about combinatorially exponential. Y to the power of y equals ax to something. That's your journey. Your journey is a hockey stick. And you must take the opportunity that the club provides, the university provides, and others in your network provide to be able to be the best you can be. Because you have within your grasp the ability to do that. In the language of our people, you are in the first trimester of life. Life is normally distributed. The first trimester is 0 to plus or minus 30 years. The second trimester being 30 to 60. The third trimester being 60 to 90. If you are born in New Zealand in the age you were born in. But with what is happening in recent times, that 90 may be shifting dramatically. Way past 90, maybe 100, maybe 110. And in fact, there is a whole movement that talks to the singularity, which is that you may have the ability to choose to be immortal. The merger of the human form factor with the machine form factor is within your grasp. So if that is the case, we want to make sure that the choices you make today, the choices you make while you are at university, are those that allow you to make sure that you are happy in the future. When we talk to people who are in the twilight of their career, and we ask them, if you were given an opportunity to go back and be in your seats at this moment, what would you do differently? They say to us, almost unanimously, that if only they were able to pursue a gig which made them happy. So we talk about this thing called the happiness index. So your productive moment is you kind of put all of this together, is to say, you know what, I come to university to learn, I come here to get a decent job, and I say to you, do not deprioritize happiness. Because you want to have fun and be happy. And that is only what you can determine, nobody else can, for yourself personally. So as I close off tonight, I just want to say thank you so much for finding time to be here on a Thursday afternoon. Evening, you shouldn't be here. This is negligent on your part. You should be out there at Shadows or somewhere else in town getting pissed. But I take my head off for doing this because you guys are truly pursuing what you believe is very important to yourselves. And so, thank you so much for giving us the opportunity, Liam and Sanam and my man Ace out there. I just want to say, if there's anything else we can do to help you guys, you know, these guys know where we live, please reach out. We're here to assist. But as you walk out of this door tonight, decide and make a decision that, you know what, your future is about being happy. It's not about pursuing, you know, a GPA. And thank you so much for the opportunity for me to speak to you.
All right. Thanks, Ab, for giving those words. That's a tough act to follow. All right, so I guess I'll kick it off by saying, so we're now going to do the interviewing aspect of this. So when you walk out of here, you decide what you want to do. This is essentially how are you going to put that into action? How are you going to get that job that you actually want to do? So I guess I'll talk a little bit about me first. So my name's Liam. I'm stage 3 computer science and mathematics. And so I've had the privilege to do a couple of internships in my time, and what that means is that I have done a lot of interviewing. Most of that interviewing was bad. I was not good at it. I never went to an event like this when I was the first year. So what I'm hoping you guys can get out of tonight is to kind of skip over all of the stuff at the beginning where you're trying to find your feet, you don't know what you're doing in an interview, skip all the awkwardness and stuff like that, and just focus on convincing the recruiter that you are the right person for this job, once you know what that is. So yeah, I did an internship 2019-2020 at MYOB here in New Zealand, and most recently I interned at Amazon Web Services. So based out of Sydney, it was remote, unfortunately, because of COVID, but still a great learning opportunity. So I'll start off by talking a little bit about job opportunities here. So as Ab touched on there, a lot of people don't actually know where to find these jobs. Coming to events like this shows that you guys are already searching for this. You've taken the first step, which is great. But there is a lot of knowledge out there and a lot of jobs out there which most people just never hear about. So there are lots of opportunities to find these. So you have networking events, which are great because you can get introduced to the companies, you can talk to the recruiters, talk to the engineers. And when you apply on the website with a CV, you are essentially anonymous to the recruiter. They don't know who you are, they don't know your story or anything like that. But if you can get there in front of a human, talk to them face to face, they can put a face to the name, they can really leverage you to try and get a job offer. So other opportunities include hackathons. Those are great. They give you experience to be able to get up in front of people and pitch. You build your technical skills by building a product of some kind, and normally they have a presentation at the end. As well, clubs. So coming to these events, I mean, you guys are already here, so this is the first step, right? But I encourage you to go to as many different events as you can, because every event will teach you something. So go to the career events, go to the technical events, whatever. You can always try and get something out of each of those events. So another program you should probably be aware of if you're not is Summer of Tech. So Summer of Tech is actually how I got my first internship. So they're great. So throughout the year, they run events. They ran 80 of these events in 2020. So these events vary a lot. Some of them are interviewing, career, technical, and a lot of these events are run by the companies that partner with Summer of Tech. So what that means is, like I was talking about earlier, you can go to these events and you can talk to the actual engineer at ANZ or one of the other companies there. You can talk to their recruiters at the career events, which is great. So then the biggest of these events is their meet and greet. So this is normally run in September, and this is basically just an industry night on steroids. They have a whole bunch of recruiters and companies there, and a whole bunch of students come and you can talk to them. So last year, unfortunately, because of COVID, they had to run this online. but when I went there, it was in person, and it's a great opportunity to, once again, allow recruiters to put a face to the name. So based off the back of that, you normally get offers in October, and then after that, the internships normally run November through February. So probably the best thing about Summer of Tech is that it has a standardized application process. So I'm someone that has done a lot of job applications. So if every company you write the CV, you write the cover letter, you upload it to their website, then it asks you to type in all the information again that was on your CV. So you don't get any of that with Summer of Tech. You fill it all out once, get it approved, and then after the meet and greet, you can apply to 10 different companies just in one click, which is great, honestly. So student registrations for this are open right now, and throughout the year they add events and companies. Another program you guys should be aware of is Microsoft Student Accelerator. So they actually have their opening night tonight here at the university, so you guys are unfortunately missing out on that, but it's worth checking out their website. So this is a very structured kind of program. So they have distinct phases, and they do a lot of training. So as part of this, you can pick a pathway to go down. So they do back-end development, databases and APIs. You can do front-end development with different web technologies. You can do DevOps if you're interested in architecture, deployments, CI/CD, etc. And then they also do data science. So what you do is you select one of these pathways to go down, and then you go through the training steps. And probably the best thing about this is that you get Microsoft certifications as you go through it. So if you go through the whole program, you don't actually end up getting a job offer at the end. It's still fine because you got these certifications as you went through, and you can take that and demonstrate to other companies that you know these skills. So the micro-credentialing that was talked about earlier. And these are free as well for the program, because normally they cost a lot of money. So I'd recommend doing it just to get those certifications. And then at the end of this, if you can go all the way through the program, then you can get a job placement. So Microsoft partners with a lot of companies here in New Zealand to place students in roles. So for example, Datacom or Vulcan, a whole bunch of different companies. So that's one option there. As well, there's a little organization called Potentia. So as you can tell from the name, it is sponsored by Potentia. So it is a student-led community, and full disclosure, I help organize some of the events. I'm a little bit biased when I say that it's great, guys, go check it out, but it really is. So what I mean when I say it's a student-led community is we get to leverage Potentia's network. They're a recruitment company, they have a lot of recruiters, they have a lot of people in industry, but all of the executive council are involved in universities. They know what students actually want out of these events. So whenever we run an event, there's a very short feedback loop between getting feedback from the students and then planning our next event. So essentially the goal of Potentia is to bridge the gap between university and industry. The best way to view it is it's kind of like a university club, but independent of any particular university. So there's industry mixes, skill workshops, networking events. It's a large focus on soft skills and talking to recruiters, how to present yourself. So we have our first event for this coming up in Tech Week, which is 24th to 30th of May. So if you check out the website there will be more details posted once the details of the event are finalized. Oh yeah, and I just want to add as well, if you guys have any questions, feel free to raise your hand. It's a pretty small room, so we can just deal with questions as they come up. Alright, so New Zealand companies. Lots of logos on there, they're our sponsors. We love our sponsors. So with New Zealand companies, you kind of have to be in the know for a lot of the companies. Some of them go through programs like Summer of Tech or Microsoft Student Accelerator, but a lot of these companies will be posting them on job portals or just on their website. So if you don't know about them, it's tough to find them. So one of the things we'll talk about later is there's a resource on the GitHub page that we made for this event, which is basically just a compiled list of all these different job boards that you should check out. The university has a great one, which not many people know about, that they maintain. So companies come to the university and say, hey, we'd like to advertise to students. So that's a great resource right there. A lot of these companies as well, they'll host events throughout the year. So as I've been saying multiple times now, go to these events, talk to people, it's your best shot. Don't just apply with a CV. As well, New Zealand companies, they tend to recruit later in the year, especially if they go through these programs like Summer of Tech or Microsoft Student Accelerator. On the other hand, you've got your overseas companies. So these are much harder to find out about these opportunities. Some people want to go and work overseas, they want to go travel and stuff like that. COVID, who knows if that's going to be happening. You might end up like me and just stuck in your bedroom for the whole summer. Not a waste of time, you learn a lot, but ideally you want to work for these companies because you want to get out of New Zealand, out of Auckland, and you want to go see some other countries. So most of these Sydney-based, your big FANG, Big N, whatever the acronym you want to use, they all tend to have their offices over in Sydney. So yeah, very hard to find if you're not aware of them, especially with COVID. They're not running events on campus often. So what you want to do for these is you want to look on the job boards, LinkedIn, Glassdoor, all of those. Like I mentioned, we have a list of it, and we'll have all the links, and it's available, so you guys don't have to memorize all of this or anything. So with these companies, interviewing tends to be online, which is great, but also kind of not. It's great because you can write stuff on post-it notes and put it behind your monitor, and it looks like you're looking right at the camera. That is a pro tip if you have any online interviewing. But it also kind of sucks because you're talking to someone through a camera and you can't really build a rapport with them. So, mixed bag. These companies also, when they do their technical interviews, there's a much bigger focus on data structures and algorithms. And we'll cover those a little bit later when we do our technical interviewing section. So yeah, this is just a quick kind of summary of what I've been talking about so far, some different opportunities, the different programs that you can get involved with, just to find those jobs, just to get your foot in the door, get that interview, sort of thing. Yeah, so that is the GitHub for this event, github.com, DEVS UA interviewing 2021. There's also a bunch of resources on there. We'll be talking about templates and stuff like that in a second, so it's well worth checking it out. I'll leave it up there for a second so people can duck down so people can get photos. All right, so now we're going to talk about behavioral interviewing. So behavioral interviewing is a pretty important part of interviewing with the company. It's normally divided behavioral and technical. So there's obviously the small talk and the chit chat that happens at the beginning of the interview, but then a lot of the times these companies and their HR departments will have questions, and what they're trying to do when they're asking you these questions is they're trying to figure out if you are a culture fit. So essentially what that means is, will you fit in with the teams there? Are you a likable enough person? Do you align with their culture and stuff like that? The way I've heard it described to me by recruiters is, if you know how to code but you don't know a particular language, they can quickly upskill you. They can teach you Java if you know Python. They can teach you C++, whatever. They're not too fussed about that. But if you are not a culture fit, if you cannot get along with the team and stuff like that, there's no chance they're going to take you. So the behavioral is probably just as important, if not more so, than the technical section. So what I'll be talking about tonight is essentially research. So that is a huge thing. Preparation for behavioral questions is key. That's how you nail them. And then so a couple of techniques to get through that. There's the STAR framework, preparation grids, question banking, and then after that I'll talk about nerves, because it's kind of inevitable when you're dealing with other people. So researching companies. This is so important. So what I like to do first of these is read the job description and then reread the job description again. The job description is kind of a hack almost, because someone from the company has put this together and they've said exactly what you need to do to get the job. They've put all of these keywords and adjectives in there that describe exactly the kind of person they're looking for this role, and all you have to do is model all of your questions so that it refers back to these. So what I do for these is I physically print it out, get a highlighter, and just work through and highlight all of these things. And then when we do the question bank later, whenever you're answering it, try and reframe it in terms of that. So after you've read your job descriptions and stuff like that, you need to know the company. You need to know what they do for starters. Also know the industry that they work in a little bit. If it's a big company like Google, most of the time people know what Google is, but if it's a smaller company or a startup, it's well worth looking into it. Don't make the mistake I did and rock up to your interview with AWS thinking you're interviewing for Amazon. They are very different, as I learned. All right, and then, yeah, so after that, you want to check out the company's culture page. So big companies tend to always have these, maybe not with smaller companies or startups, but once again, this is a hack for essentially how to get through the behavioral interviewing section. So what they'll do is they'll put their core values or their manifesto, whatever they want to call it. But essentially what you're going to do is you're going to go through it, find all the keywords, all the adjectives, and then just frame your responses in terms of those, because that can show that you are a culture fit. They've told you the culture, so you just need to fit it now. So what I did is, for example, Amazon, they have something they call their 11 leadership principles. So I went through, printed it off, read them all, and then when I was working through the question banks and all the questions and preparing for the behavioral interviews, I just framed it in terms of those 11 leadership principles, and it helped a lot. And sometimes they'll be very blatant. They'll ask, like, tell me about a time you demonstrated our certain value in university or in your work and stuff like that. So if you know these, it helps because they nearly always come up. Finally, what you can do as well is you can check out LinkedIn. LinkedIn's great. You can see if you know anyone working at the company or if you know someone who knows someone at the company, 2 degrees of separation there. It's great because you can ask them questions about it, about the hiring process, Sometimes you can ask them for a referral. Lots of companies have a referral program, so it's actually in the employee's interest to refer good candidates because they get some cash out of it, actually. And then as well, Glassdoor. So the cool thing about Glassdoor is people anonymously review the companies they work at. They post salary data, they post reviews about the management, what it's like to actually work there. But in my opinion, the best thing about it is people post interview questions on there. So if you're interviewing for a company and you search it up on Glassdoor, and you search for the specific job, like software engineering intern or a software engineering graduate, people will post all the questions they will ask. Like for technical questions, it's great, you can see exactly what they're asking. Behavioral questions is great as well, and a lot of the time, they'll put the answers there as well. So it's free preparation done for you already. So the first tool you want to use when you're preparing is the STAR framework. So this stands for situation, task, action, result. This is probably the simplest way to answer pretty much any behavioral question. It gives the recruiter exactly what they are looking for. So a lot of the time, a question will be phrased in terms of, describe a time you demonstrated X, Y, Z, or tell me about a time when this happened, and stuff like that. So what you want to do is you want to use the STAR framework to answer it. So situation is where you're going to talk about the event. So if you're relating to an event that happened while you were at university, in a group project, talk about that. Give a little bit of context, a little bit of background there. Next up, you want to talk about the task. So the task is what you have to do. Oftentimes, this will be a problem. So if they ask, tell me about a time you had some conflict, you're going to describe what the conflict was. Next, you want to talk about the action. So you want to talk what you did and how you did it. So this is how you solved the task. A common mistake here is if it's in a team setting, people will say, oh, we did this and we implemented that, which is great, but the interviewer is not interviewing the team, they're interviewing you. So you want to specifically say stuff you did. It may seem a little bit arrogant, and some people don't like to talk like that, but trust me, they don't want to know what the team did. Finally, you want to talk about the result, so what actually happened. So this is after you implemented the action to solve the task in the situation. So it's great if you can kind of quantify this using numbers. That makes it much more easy to understand. So as an example of this, your situation is, I led a team of 6 for a project at university. Then you have some kind of task, or something that comes up. So 2 teammates disagreed about how to divide up the tasks, and we got nothing done. Then you want to describe exactly what you did. So you notice here that it's I got the team's opinions, and I got the 2 team members to discuss their differences. I created a team contract for future conflict. And finally, you want to talk about the result. So the result is we finished the project 2 weeks early. So you notice once again, you throw in some numbers in there, try and quantify the result of this. You can frame all your responses to behavioral questions like this. The recruiters will love it. It makes their job much easier. Right, so in saying that, a lot of people, when they're trying to get into the software industry, get their first internship, or if you haven't had any internships and you're applying for grad roles, a lack of industry experience can seem a little bit daunting. So it's very important to remember that all experience is good experience. So all those university group projects, a part-time job you had during the summer, volunteering, working for a club, all of that stuff counts, and you can use that to answer behavioral questions. It doesn't really matter where the event happened. They're more looking for how you as a person reacted to it, what you did, and what was the outcome. So yeah, you can use all of these experiences to prepare, and probably the best way to do that is using a preparation grid. So once again, this is up on the GitHub up there, so you don't need to worry about taking photos and stuff. So Word documents, you can go through and fill out all the tabs and everything. So with these, what you want to do is, along the x-axis, just put the different projects, different experiences you've had. So university projects, personal projects, part-time work, volunteering, does not have to be prior work experience. Then along the y-axis, you want to put a whole bunch of different dimensions there. So stuff like a challenge you had, some learnings, all of those sorts of things. Because these are very common questions that will come up. And suddenly now, if you get asked, tell me about a time you had a challenge, you've got 4 examples right there. And so what I do for these, put on a single sheet of A4 paper, write some keywords in there, review it right before you go into an interview. You've got a whole bunch of experience there to talk about. Next up, you can talk about question banks. So with behavioral interviewing, the key is essentially preparation. If you treat it like an exam, if you've done all of the past papers for an exam going back to 2012, you walk into the exam hall, you're going to know pretty much every question on that piece of paper. If you view a behavioral question or a behavioral interview like that, if you just prepare for it, most of the time they reuse questions. There's sort of a common core set of questions all HR managers tend to use for these kinds of interviews. So if you can prep for it, that's great. So yeah, you want to work through as many of these questions as possible. It'll give you the confidence, and we'll talk about nerves in a second. And when you're working through these, you want to try and answer them using the STAR framework, which we were talking about earlier. So we have compiled a question bank of these, so just essentially a huge list of all these questions and stuff like that. So I'd like to thank Michelle. I don't know if she's here. Is she here tonight? No. She actually gave me a question bank last year, which I've modified and re-uploaded there, and that helped me to get past all my behavioral interviews and stuff like that. It really does work. So yeah, that's an example. There's just a whole bunch of behavioral questions there. Lots of these I've been asked personally, or other people in devs in the industry have been asked as well. So yeah, once again, up on our GitHub. You don't need to worry about taking photos or anything. All right, so we've got a quick prize. It's a t-shirt. So anyone here can remember what are the 4 components of the STAR framework?
Situation, task, action, and results.
Yeah. So afterwards, come find us. We'll get your name down and size, and we'll grab you a t-shirt, mate. Good job. Sorry, whoever was trying to call that out from over there. I'm sure you knew it, mate. Yeah. So situation, task, action, result. So this is how you want to be framing. Do you have a question?
I've got a question in terms of interview preparation. What would you personally think of going for an interview for something you're, let's say, semi-interested in? I know it's a bit of a waste of HR time, but it gets you more prepared for then the actual real deal, and you're just so much more comfortable, let's say, when you don't care so much about.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. So that's actually one of the things I was going to talk about. It's actually on the next one. Look at that. Perfect timing. Yeah, he's not a prompt in the audience. Trust me, guys. Yeah. So no, that's a great point. So when it comes to interviewing, when you start off, if you've never done interviews before, you are going to be nervous, and nerves are kind of inevitable. I was talking at the beginning, like when I was a first year interviewing at all these companies, I had no idea what to say. I'm shocked anyone actually like called me back for a second interview and stuff. So that's not a bad idea, actually. You don't want to abuse it. You don't want to apply to 100 companies and waste all their time. Like you said, it does waste a bit of HR time, but at the end of the day, all sorts of interviewing experience is great experience. Even just applying for other jobs, like part-time jobs and stuff like that, interviewing experience is interviewing experience. It doesn't have to be in your specific industry that you want to get a grad role or something like that. Yeah, great point. That's a great way to get more experience. Yeah, so nerves. Nerves are kind of inevitable. Everyone gets nerves. You can kind of mitigate the effect of them by practicing a lot. So go to different interviews, give public presentations and stuff like that. If you can get up in front of people and talk to them, that helps a lot. Because then when you're in an interview, Yeah.
With experience, how long, would you recommend, say, sort of drawing from your experience from, say, how long do you think would be sort of too long to sort of refer to experience? Like, say, experience from 5 years or, say, something like that?
Good point. So if you go for like entry-level roles, I mean, kind of does depend. I don't know, if you're in your 40s and you're applying for jobs, don't talk about stuff you did in high school, but I think 5 years is okay sort of thing, especially if you took a bit of a break or you were studying full-time, or if you did summer school and you didn't have an opportunity to do internships during the summer. I think just, maybe introduce that when you're talking about the situation you were in, just say, hey, this was a couple of years ago, but it's still something you did, and people don't tend to change very quickly in terms of their responses. Unless it was a bad experience, then don't talk about it, but yeah.
One of it's the case that those are sort of your notable experience, that's your notable sort of, that's where your most notable experiences are.
Oh, definitely talk about it then, yeah.
If that's like, you don't have anything within like the last 2 years or something like that, for example.
Yeah, I mean, that's a bit of a tough one. There's no like hard and fast rule that like 5 years is the cutoff or anything like that. If you don't have anything for the last couple of years, you kind of have to talk about those previous experiences. I mean, as I was saying earlier, there's all types of experience. It's not necessarily working at a company or doing an internship. If you volunteered or organized an event or something like that, you can use those experiences to answer these questions, because people deal with challenges. You deal with teams all the time, sort of thing. So a lot of the questions are very focused on how you interact with other team members and stuff. Kind of answer your question?
Yeah.
Right, yeah, so nerves, kind of inevitable. You can get over them through preparation, and like all of behavioral interviewing, it is preparation that matters. So the cool thing about behavioral interviewing is you're being quizzed on the subject. You're the expert on you. No one in the world knows you better than you do. So when the interviewer is asking you all of these questions, you should have the answers, because it's experiences you've gone through. If you can practice and you kind of already have written these out beforehand, it just makes it quicker to remember them. But at the end of the day, they're just trying to figure out who you are as a person, and once again, you know you better than anyone. And finally as well, it's important to remember that the behavioral interview is not the be-all, end-all of the interviewing process. If you can just scrape through it, maybe you slip up, forget to store for a bit of time because you don't actually remember something, that's okay. If you can just get through it, there's always the technical interviews as well. And speaking of technical interviews, I'd like to invite Ben up. He'll be talking about them now. He'll talk about how to ace all of your technical questions.
Great. Thank you, Liam. Switch over the slides. Yeah, I'll pull them up. Awesome. Thank you. So getting the job. So once you've gone through the hurdle of kind of talking to the recruiter, getting an interview, you've skipped past the behavioral interview with all these pro tips from Liam, and now you're up to the technical interview, the kind of the dragon at the end of the road that's guarding the job. So there's lots of kind of misconceptions and stuff about technical interviews, and today I'll be kind of talking through some tips and tricks to get through them and get the job. So firstly, I'd like to introduce myself. So I'm Ben. I'm a third-year PhD student at the Auckland University studying machine learning and computer science. So I've had my fair share of interview experiences. I've worked at 2 startups in San Francisco, one remotely here from Auckland and one over in San Francisco. I've done an internship at Google, and I've worked at kind of a data science startup here in Auckland. So I've done quite a few interviews, a few successful ones, and quite a few non-successful ones as well. So I've got some experience. I'm not a master, so feel free to ask any questions. Some other devs people also have lots of experience interviewing, and we can all work together to kind of get a good answer. So let's start with what is a technical interview. So firstly, if you ask a whole bunch of people what a technical interview is, you'll get a whole range of answers. Some people will say it's grinding HackerRank and leak code. Some people will say it's reversing a linked list. Some people will say it's growing a binary tree in the wrong direction. But pretty much everyone's going to agree it's not a great time. You have to put some effort into studying. They're stressful. You're going to get nervous. So that's what this talk is kind of aimed at. How do we make sure you have a good time doing a technical interview? So let's first kind of break down before we get into what the interview is. We're going to talk about why they exist. Why do companies force you to go through this kind of stressful process? Then we'll get on to what they actually are, and then we'll kind of go through some tips to getting through them successfully. So firstly, why? Why does a company give you a technical interview? You've gone through the behavioral one. You've gone through the recruiter. Why do they need you to sit down and code on a whiteboard in front of them? Well, the answer is that employers solve problems. They've got all these new, exciting problems. They wouldn't be a company if they didn't have problems to solve, and they need you to solve them for them. They want to hire you to solve their problems. So that kind of brings us to misconception number 1 about interviews, and that is that the actual problem is the important part, that a technical interview is there to test that you can solve the problem that they're given to you. And really, that's not the case. The interview really doesn't care about the answer to the problem they give you. They'll tell you to reverse a linked list. They don't want a reverse linked list. That's not interesting to them. What they care about is how you solve the problem. So they're going to look at how do you approach the problem so that when, after they hire you, which they will after this talk, when they come up with this new problem in their business, that you can approach that problem in a good way and figure out how to solve it. Probably a problem nobody's ever seen before, and they need you to come up with a solution. So they care about your problem-solving ability. They care about how well you figure out this new problem. So with that in mind, that the interview doesn't care about the actual problem that you're solving, the answer's not the important part, it's the friends you make along the way, the problem-solving skills that you show them. What is a technical interview? So a technical interview is a kind of new technical puzzle that hopefully you haven't seen before, that the interviewer will give you to kind of work through with them. So I kind of before COVID, you'd go into the business usually, they'd set up a whiteboard, they'd give you the problem, you'd kind of write down your solution on the board. Now it's probably going to be online, but the idea is the same. They'll give you this problem, they'll get you to solve it, kind of in words first, code it up, test it, and kind of problem solve your way through it. So let's look at kind of some steps, kind of a brief overview. First, you'll meet your interviewer. So if you're a phone interview, they'll call you up. If you're in person, you kind of go meet them. You'll have some small talk, kind of behavioral interview stuff, just some more chit chat. And you'll probably decide on a language to use. So this is kind of something people get stuck up on a lot. You know, which language should I learn for an interview? Which one shouldn't I use? Sometimes the company will decide that for you. They'll say you have to use Java, you have to use C#. But usually they're going to let you pick a language because, again, it's not the solution to your problem, it's the problem solving. You can do that in any language you want. We'll talk about that a little bit later. Then the interview is going to describe a problem for you to solve. Then there's you kind of do the rest. After the interview does the problem, you want to ask them clarifying questions, really wrap your head around the problem, come up with the solution, implement your solution, test that it's right, and then finally you get the job, of course. So the rest of this talk, we're kind of going to go through this process and give you a quick little example at the end. So firstly, how to prepare. Kind of one of the most important parts. What can you do now after this talk? What can you go home and do to give yourself the best interview process? I've kind of got some 4 skills here that I think are quite important that we're going to look at. So background knowledge, kind of what do you need to study up on before your test? I talked like it's solving problems, but you still need to know some stuff. Secondly, problem solving skills. How can you practice that a little bit? Thirdly, working with the interviewer. This is a really important one that a lot of people miss. How do you, the interview is not just kind of solving the problem, it's showing the interview that you can solve the problem. So kind of working with them, making sure you show your ability to them the best is probably the most important part. And finally, programming skills. You do need to know how to program for a technical interview. I'm not really qualified to teach you how to program, so we're going to leave that as homework. Okay, so background knowledge. What do we need? One of the most important things is data structures and algorithms. So if you're a comp sci student, this is what you get taught in 220 and 320. If you're a software engineer, I don't know what courses, but you'll get taught it. Everyone gets taught it. And they're taught because they're useful in a huge range of problems. Pretty much any problem that you encounter in a technical interview has a somewhat easy solution if you know the right data structure. Kind of it just slots right in, solves the problem for you, and that's about it. And to do that, you need to actually kind of know what these data structures are. You're really not going to figure them out in the interview process. You need to know them beforehand to use them. Some examples, stacks and queues, like a deck of cards. Hash map, which is a dictionary in Python. You can use for caching and stuff, and depth first and breadth first search. So if none of these look familiar, and you haven't taken 220, you'll probably learn them in 220. But I recommend kind of learning them. They're really useful. So what can you do? Firstly, what can you do to kind of get this background knowledge? Firstly is learn. Take the courses, go on YouTube, look up data structures and algorithms. There's a whole bunch of quality kind of learning content online. And secondly is practice. You can't just look up something and get it stuck in your head. You actually have to practice using it. We'll look at this a little bit later, but again, HackerRank and LeetCode are really good practice tools. Same with Cracking the Coding Interview. It's a really good book, and it's just really good practice. And finally, you actually have to use the data structures in your interview. It's no point learning all these things and then getting to the interview and just trying to solve a problem by yourself. You really have to think of them as phone a friend in your interview. Yeah, from Who Wants to Be a Millionaire? You're stuck on a problem, you call up a friend and they'll tell you the answer. And that's kind of what these data structures and algorithms do. If you get stuck on a problem in an interview, just think about all the data structures you know, and one of them probably will help you. Lastly, for background knowledge, this one isn't as important, but speed is a key thing in an interview. You probably have maybe 45 minutes to solve a problem, so you really want to be going at a good pace. And if you get stuck on, there's kind of two things that come up a lot. One of them is powers of 2, 2, 4, 8, 16. They come up all the time in computing, and also logs. These can pop up in really weird places in an interview, and if you get stuck trying to actually solve them, you're not going to have a good time-wise. So kind of back of your head knowing that 64 is like twice 32. It's not necessary, but it's a good thing to know time-wise. And lastly is big O. So again, this is taught in 220, but it's talking about the efficiency of your algorithm. So one of the really key things in an interview is they don't just care about your solution, they care about how good your solution is. So if you come up with this really fancy algorithm, they're always 100% of the time going to say, well, how efficient is it? Time-wise and memory-wise. So how you describe that is called big O. So think about how many times are you looping over things, how much space are you storing, that kind of thing. Okay, so moving on from background knowledge, we're going on to the problem-solving stuff. So there's really two key areas to getting good at problem solving, and firstly is knowing common patterns, and secondly is practice. So let's talk about patterns. Here are some kind of example patterns for solving problems. And one of the things you'll see if you do a lot of practice is that a lot of interview questions really look the same on the inside. A lot of the array ones are going to look like other array ones, and you start to see that you can solve them all doing kind of the same thing. So you apply one solution that you had to a different problem to your current problem, and you see like a pretty easy solution straight away. So learning some of these common patterns is a really useful thing. So dynamic programming, that kind of thing. And lastly is just practice. So it sounds a little bit weird at first that you can actually practice problem solving, but really you can. If you solve a lot of interview problems, when you get to the interview, you'll be a whole lot better. I remember when I first started using LeetCode, I haven't used it that much, but I couldn't solve even like the easiest ones. And even without any learning or background knowledge, once you get used to it, you solve 3 or 4, you'll just be that much quicker. So really, practice is the key. And I think one of the most important things there is just being comfortable when you're stuck. You're always going to get stuck in an interview. You're going to have something that you can't just think through. That's kind of the whole point of the interview. And how you deal with that is really, really important. It's kind of what the interviewer is looking for. Do you freeze up, get stressed, kind of your brain goes into overdrive and you can't figure it out? Or do you kind of sit down and really like solve it? It's kind of the really important thing in an interview, and it comes with practice, just doing it a whole lot. Here are some example ways you can practice. So we've got HackerRank, LeetCode. So these are both websites that kind of have a whole bunch of problems on them that you can go through. They've got solutions, usually. They've also got kind of teaching things to kind of teach you about the important parts of the problem. Another one is Cracking the Coding Interview again. This is kind of like these websites, but in book form. And I wouldn't recommend the actual book because it's a big boy. But you can get a PDF, legally, hopefully. And there's a whole lot more kind of websites out there. So I really, really recommend this a whole lot. Some people recommend it a bit too much. They talk about grinding LeetCode and stuff like that. You don't want to go overboard. You don't want to dedicate your whole life to practicing, but you'll definitely want to do 3 or 4 questions on there just to get comfortable. And talking about problem solving and cracking the coding interview, there's a really good kind of general guide to solving any problem you come across in an interview. And we're kind of just going to go through it because I think it's really useful. And it starts with just firstly listening to the problem really carefully. Because an interview, you got 45 minutes. Your interviewer is not going to be talking about random stuff when they're describing the problem. They're going to tell you the problem. They're going to probably give you small, what seems like random details that are actually going to be really important to your solution. So I would recommend you really listen carefully, get every little tidbit the interviewer says and think, okay, they mentioned an array is sorted. That's going to be useful for my problem. So really just listen to the problem really carefully. And kind of a key to that is also asking clarifying questions if you don't understand anything. If the interviewer says, you're going to get past an array, yep.
Would you be able to note down certain things on, say,
That's a really good point. I would highly recommend you, while the interviewer is kind of describing the problem, take notes. You don't want to forget. I mean, if you do, they're just there to ask, but you don't want to forget a whole part of the problem that you haven't done. So I'd really recommend taking notes. I think that's a really good idea. And secondly, once you've kind of got a good grasp of the problem, is make some examples. So put together some examples that you think really show what the problem's all about. And one of the key things here is that you get an answer. So you kind of construct an input to your problem, figure out what it should be, and then ask your interviewer and say, is this correct? Have I grasped the problem right? Because what you really don't want to do, and what's really easy to do, is solve the wrong problem. So you kind of got the problem in your head, you say, okay, I'm going to go solve that. You come up with this really good algorithm, and at the end of the thing, your interviewer says, okay, but I actually wanted you to solve this other similar problem. And the way you get around that is with examples, constructing fake things and getting the interviewer to say you're right or wrong. Yep.
What's an edge case?
So that's a good point. An edge case is it's kind of a case where strange things might happen. So consider they give you a list of numbers and your solution handles lists of numbers really well. But what if the list is empty, right? Then different things might happen. So those are really what you want to focus on, is kind of making sure you're handling all those slightly strange inputs that you might get. So empty list, maybe the list's already sorted, could be an edge case. Just kind of the slightly out of the normal inputs that you might encounter. Okay, so now you've got the problem in your head. You know you're right because you've made some examples. How do we go about solving it? And a good solution, I think, is a brute force. So you don't worry about efficiency. You don't worry about what the best solution is. You just straight up try and solve it. So this is called a brute force solution, and it's a really good thing to start first. And once you've got your brute force, you can go about optimizing it. So look at any of the information the interviewer kind of said. Maybe they said the array is sorted already. Maybe they said, you're only going to have numbers 1 to 100. Kind of think about that and say, what can I use? How can I use that information to simplify the problem that I've got? Finally, once you've kind of got a solution, this is before you've started coding, by the way. You kind of want to work through your solution with your interviewer step by step and kind of check that it does work. So you want to go through your examples. Do you get what you think you should get? And finally, once you've got a solution, you want to code it up. Again, I'm not going to talk about the actual coding, but try and do your best, be on your best behavior coding-wise, use functions and all that good stuff. And finally, test it. Test your code, make sure it's right, give it to your interviewer and say, I'm done. This is beautiful code, hire me. And that's problem solving. Your problem solved, interview's done. But remember the why. Why were we doing this interview in the first place? And it was to show the interviewer that you can solve problems, that you know how to take a problem that you don't know, work through it, and solve it. So if you're just sitting there on your laptop, coding out your solution, not talking to anybody, how does your interviewer know that? Sure, they know at the end, you got the right solution, maybe. But what if you didn't get the right solution? Or what if, you already know the problem? So just finishing the problem doesn't show the interviewer that you know how to solve a problem. So this brings us to really one of the key parts of the interview, and that is working with the interviewer. So it is telling the interviewer what your thought process is at each stage of the interview. You encounter a problem, you want to verbalize that and tell them how you're thinking through it, how you're solving that problem, so they really know that you are solving that problem, that you didn't just know the answer beforehand, bring that in, code it up. So this is really the most important part of the interview, kind of just talk with your interviewer every single step of the way. Even when you're stuck, tell them why you're stuck, why you think you're stuck, the solutions you're thinking about. And also, the interviewer wants to help. So if you ever do get stuck, don't be afraid to ask. They're not going to think you're stupid. These problems are there because they're hard problems. Yep.
What would you do in a situation where there's essentially no interviewer? It's just like a purely online time.
Yeah. So that's a little bit different. Some companies do get you to do kind of video tests. But I would also recommend talking through it, because they want to see the same things. They want to see that you know how to solve a problem. So you want to kind of explain all of your thought process. A little bit different. You can't kind of talk with them and say, like, do you have any hints or something, which you can do in an in-person one. So possibly a little bit harder. But you still want to kind of verbalize your whole thought process, because that's really what they're interested in, not the final outcome. Cool. So that's a little brief look at coding. I would suggest that you learn one language really well. They're not really going to care if you know Java, Python, C++, if you don't really know any of them that well. So for interviews, I would pick kind of your go-to interview language, learn that one really well. Show that you can learn the language in depth, know all the little knobs that you can do, the little features, and learn how to do clean modular code. And don't forget functions in your interview. You're not just spamming code out onto the page. You want it to look nice. Cool. So now we're at the point where we're thinking about the problem. Like, how do we actually implement a solution? So the first thing the interview is going to do is they're going to give you a problem. We're going to call it the base case, because it's kind of the first problem that they give you. It's kind of the simple problem, often comes with constraints. Maybe it's sorted. You've got a sorted array or something. And then you're going to solve it. So we're going to look at a little example here based on the stock market. So, GME, we all want to be stock traders now, right? So let's think about this problem. You are, and I'm going to be the interviewer here, so this is the problem that you're going to get. So given a list of the prices of a stock on different days, we want you to return a day to buy on and a day to sell on, which would earn you the most profit. So think about that a little bit. How would we go about solving it? Fortunately, I don't think we have too much time, otherwise I'd probably get you to do it yourselves, but think about it a little bit. And then remember, the first step was ask clarifying questions. So make sure we've really got a handle on what this question's asking us. So you might want to ask, are the days sorted? And I might say, yes, the days are sorted by date. So that might make the problem a little bit easier, it might not. But we've asked the question, so now we know. Do we have to pick a day to buy and sell on? And I'm going to say yes. It doesn't really matter to me, but for the problem, let's say yes. What happens if we return the same day to buy and sell? You profit 0. Can we sell before we buy? I might say no. So these are just kind of questions to make sure that you're really solving the right problem. Because, if we could sell before we bought, that would be kind of a completely different problem to the problem I'm giving you. So you wouldn't want to go off without asking this clarifying question, solving the wrong problem, and have the interviewer say, actually, you can't sell before you buy, right? So these questions are really important to ask. Spelling mistake there, make an example. So these are kind of some examples that you could construct. So this first one's really simple. Price just goes up from 1 to 6. And you kind of figure out what would we do there. Well, profit would be 5. We buy on day 1, day 0, and sell on day 5. What if it's just decreasing? Also a profit of 0. What if we have a mix of kind of prices across the day? Well, you kind of figure out best time to buy is on when the price is 3, sell on day 5, make a profit of 2. So these examples are really good. You can ask your interviewer and kind of say, okay, if I was given this list and I said the profit is 2, would I be right? Would I be wrong? And they can help you out to kind of say, you've got the question right in your head, go towards solving it. So how do we actually solve it? Well, I told you, think about a brute force. So what's a brute force way to do this problem? And that is to just check every single pair of days in your list and say, what would happen if we bought on this day, sold on this other day, what would our profit be? And just check that for every single pair of days and return the pair with the highest profit. So that will give us our right answer, right? Yep. But is this efficient? No. Can anyone tell me how efficient this problem is? So the big O, if you know it. Yep.
Is big O even more slightly detailed of ends?
Yes.
Because you have one that you check the initial days because of n, and you check the selling date, which is also n. But in actual situation, you just go from the first one you check n times, the last time check n one time, n plus 1 times n divided by 2, but you still exceed the n.
Yep. So you've got it. So you've won yourself a prize. Make sure you come up afterwards to give us your name and contact details so we can get it to you. So the answer here was n squared. And basically what that means is you have a list. You kind of have to go through it once to find all the days that you'd buy on. And then for each of those days, you'd have to look through it again for each of the days you sell on. So if you don't know what big O is, n squared might sound a bit weird, but it's describing how efficient it is. And this one is not very efficient. Here's some kind of example code, how you might do it. We're taking a list of prices. We're just going over all possible days to buy on, all possible days to sell on, finding our profit, and returning the maximum there. So can we optimize this a little bit? So we want to think about what are the patterns here in our data that we could use to kind of help us. And one of the patterns, I said, arrays being sorted was a really good one. That's quite often a really good pattern to think about. And does that help us here? Another one is, what are the limitations of the problem? So here we have to buy before we sell. That's a limitation. And then we think about, can we kind of use these patterns? Can we avoid these limitations in some way which lets us solve the problem quicker? So the pattern here, I'm going to go pretty quickly for time reasons. But the idea is we want to find the largest gap. So we want to find the day where we can buy at the smallest price and the day where we can sell at the highest price. So find the biggest gap between days that we can possibly get. So one kind of first approach is, could we just store the minimum day, kind of the day with the lowest price, take the day with the highest price, and then take the difference as profit? So can we do that?
No, we can't, because as you said, it looks like all those examples that you demonstrated, it's not always completely in order, or it's not in a ascending or descending order. So it would make it a bit weird.
Yeah.
So that's not exact.
So the problem we'd run into there is exactly, if it was just ascending, that would work fine. Our minimum would be at the start, maximum at the end. The profit is the difference there. But remember, our constraint was that we can't sell before we buy. So what happens if our minimum is after our maximum day? So if we go back to think about the descending example, what if we start with a really high price and then end with a really low price? We can't buy at that high price and go back in time and sell at that starting price. So that's not going to work. So come up afterwards and contact details. We'll get you a prize. So, we need to buy before we sell, basically. And one way we can do that, there's a whole bunch of ways of solving this problem. In the interest of time, I've kind of put one way of solving this problem, and that is to keep track of the current day that you could have got the best possible price. So you kind of step through the days and say, what is the best possible time I could have bought previously? And then you can work out your maximum possible profit at each day. So you kind of say, I'm at day 5. I know I could have bought at day 2 for $1. What's my profit now if I sold? And can anyone tell me how efficient this method will be? Not for a prize, but can anyone tell me? Unfortunately. Well, for this one, we're just stepping through the list once, right? The other one, for the last brute force example, it was bad because we had to kind of loop through the list, and then for every buy day we were checking, we were going through the whole list again, right? this method, we're just looking at each day once. So it's going to be a lot more efficient. Here's the code for that one. And I've got some code to show you, but I'm not sure how to get to it. Oh, yeah, there we go. So if you're not too... Yeah. Cool. Yeah, so the actual code's not too important. But what I just want to show you guys is that this is our brute force one that we had on the slides before. And if we have this test where we've got kind of 10,000 days, and then we run it, and we're timing it, and we're timing it, and we're timing it, and our interviewer is kind of looking at his watch saying, your function's really slow, why is it so bad? And we're still timing it. And this is why we want efficient solutions, right? And there we go. So this one took, we had some tests, we got true at all of them. Don't worry too much about that, but basically we're passing all the tests, but we also took 16 seconds. So that's not very good code, but it's good for the brute force. So it was good for just kind of getting our solution out there, making sure we had some way to solve the problem. Kind of tells your interviewer that, you know, if they run into problems, you can solve their problems. You might not get the best solution, but you know how to solve a problem. And then let's look at our kind of optimized but wrong function. So we're just looking at the maximum of the prices and the minimum of the prices. So let's run that one. And wow, it's instant. You know, your interviewer is super happy. It took, you know, less than 1 second there. And then they start looking at the test results and see, okay, this one actually failed. So we didn't get the right price there for exactly the reason you pointed out, that this one isn't actually solving our problem. And finally, this brings us to the correctly optimized kind of final solution. And we run this one, and we still get a really low time, and we've got everything true. So if we were in an interview, do you think we would have to get this correct solution at the end to get hired? Does anyone think we would have to? And really, it depends. Like, you could get hired just doing the brute force one. You could get hired not even coming up with any workable code. What really matters is your thought process behind solving the problem and kind of what the interviewer thinks of that. So if you talked through this whole problem, you kind of figured out the problem really well, you came up with some really good examples, you kind of asked the interviewer all the clarifying questions that you needed, and maybe you just never got this optimized function correctly, and you could still get the job. I think it would be, you're much more likely, if you do all of those things right, you're much more likely to get the job than someone who's just sat down there, coded on their laptop, got this optimized function right away, and, you know, slammed their lid and ran out of the interview. So really the important part that the interviewer is looking for is your problem-solving skills. So kind of if you talk through all this problem, you're pretty likely to get the job. Now this one was a little bit simplified compared to what you'll find on LeetCode and HackerRank. It was actually kind of taken from LeetCode. But it's a good kind of demonstration of the different stages of a problem. So what happens when you do solve that in your interview? Well, firstly, you'd test it. So you go back to all those examples that you came up with. In the code that I just went through, that was all automatic. But in a whiteboard interview, you'd be kind of solving those by hand, right? So you'd go back to those arrays of prices, and you'd kind of say, walk step by step through my code. What happens if a first value is 1, then the second value is 2? It gets a little bit tedious, but you kind of do have to do it in an interview. They're not just interested in if you can code, they're interested in if you can code correctly and know that you're correct. So testing is often overlooked part of interviewing, but it's quite important. So now you've come up with a solution, you've tested it, and you've still got like 20 minutes left in your 45-minute interview. What happens then? Do they just let you go and say you've got the job? No. Well, you've solved the problem, but the interviewer still kind of wants to look at your problem-solving ability. So they're probably going to ask you another problem. You just can't finish technical interviews. They're not going to be done with you and say, okay, you can go. Here's your prize. They're going to keep quizzing you, keep trying to figure out how much you know, how good you are, until the end of your time. So let's say we finished that question. We came up with our solution, we implemented it, we tested it, and now our interviewer kind of extends the problem. They make it a little bit harder. I've found in my interviews, they usually don't ask you a completely unrelated question. They're usually going to take the question that you've just answered, probably maybe remove a constraint, maybe add something else new into the mix. But they're usually going to ask you like a similar problem that kind of expands on your solution to the past one. Usually harder. They're not really going to ask you an easier question. So for this one, so before we were looking at if we picked a day to buy on and a day to sell on, what was the maximum profit? How would it change if we could buy and sell multiple times? So we could buy, then we could sell, then we could buy again, then we'd sell again. So how does this change the problem? Or does it change the problem? It could be a trick question. Your interviewer just wants to make you think through the problem without really changing anything. So the first thing to notice is we don't care about the minimum max anymore. Here, the profit for the other time would be 4. We'd just take the highest day, the lowest day, and minus them. But now we can do some tricky stuff and actually get a profit of 5. We buy the first day, sell the second day, buy the third day, sell the fourth day. So unfortunately for this extension, we can't just reuse our solution. Our interviewer is not going to be very happy with that. So we need to kind of solve this really as a whole new problem. Kind of think about the constraints, ask clarifying questions, that kind of thing. So in this case, the intuition is we want to buy before every increase and sell before every dip. So really, I would recommend that before you even jump to the coding, you kind of think through the problem, kind of build an intuition for how you're going to solve it, and try and explain it in words to your interviewer. So you'd kind of want to come up with this statement of how we're going to solve it before even thinking about any lines of code. And you can even probably ask them if they think you're right. They're not going to say, yeah, you're right, code it, but they'll usually give you some hints, like, yeah, that's a good attempt. So kind of the idea of this new solution, no prizes here, unfortunately, is that we kind of want to break up our list into kind of segments where the price is increasing, so we can buy like while it's increasing and then sell when it stops increasing, and then we can kind of do that for every increasing segment. It's kind of the idea behind this one. And I don't have any code for this one, unfortunately. I think it's a good homework exercise for you guys if you want to do this. And you could even, who knows, you might apply it to your stock of choice and make lots of money. No guarantees. And then what if we solve that problem? Our interviewers come back and says, you're a great candidate, you've solved 2 problems, but your interview's still not over. We're going to ask you another one. So they might say, what if the days aren't sorted anymore? So they remove another constraint. And usually, in my interviews, I've found kind of once they start removing too much, they're kind of just ad-libbing the problem, right? They don't really know what the solution is. So in this case, I don't think there's really a good way to do it if the days aren't sorted. I haven't thought this one through too much, so feel free to come up to me afterwards with your amazingly quick solution. But I think, generally, if it's not sorted, you'd probably have to go back to the old checking every kind of pair of days and seeing which one's better. Cool. And so last tip of the day, think about data structures. So think about how you can apply all of the data structures you know to a problem. So tip of the day, good thing to remember. And the best way to get better at problem solving is to have fun. So don't just go grinding leak code, grinding HackerRank if you don't enjoy it. Really try and kind of get into the problem-solving spirit, I guess, and kind of enjoy solving these problems, because really they are kind of fun. You know, you solve the puzzle, you feel good about yourself, you feel smart. So I'll leave you on that. So I hope you've enjoyed the presentation. Yeah, feel free to come up afterwards if you've got any good ideas about solving the previous two extensions. And yeah, hope you enjoyed the presentation. Go get some jobs.
Alrighty, guys. So we'll quickly just tack on a Q&A at the end here because with the weather and Peter's running slightly late, but it'll be here soon. So we'd like to open the floor. We've got a whole bunch of DEVS exec here as well who've done a whole bunch of different internships. Lots of people interned at Atlassian, lots of New Zealand companies as well. So if you have any questions regarding that, we can talk about that. Alternatively, as well, we can go through a couple of the resources I was talking about earlier. There was a GitHub and stuff like that. Lots of great resources on there. Yeah, so to start off, do we have any questions for anyone? Yeah.
I understand a lot of the internships are during like the summer holidays. Is it common to get an internship like just once every weekend? Like just a
Oh, like a micro internship sort of thing?
no idea. It's like often like on the weekend or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of that's more like a part-time job sort of thing if you're going in consistently a couple of hours per week. There are some of those. Those tend to be, you kind of need to have a little bit of experience beforehand because they're looking for someone to actually deliver consistently sort of thing. There are a lot of tech companies here that will hire students part-time to kind of do web development stuff and everything like that. But yeah, there are definitely opportunities. You just need to know where to look for them. Check the GitHub. There's one section on there all about like student jobs and stuff like that for tech. So another question over there?
Yeah, two things. One of them was basically with the, I'll probably talk to you directly with Potentia.
Okay, yeah, we can talk about it. Was there any other questions from people? Yeah?
So when does recruiting season usually start and end for like a coming year?
Oh yeah, that's good. That's a good question. So if you're trying to apply for overseas companies, so the Sydney ones most of the time, they recruit very early because they want to be able to lock people in contracts and stuff like that. So yeah, beginning of the year, a lot of them are actually closing like mid-April as well. So you need to get onto it if that's what you want to go for. Grad roles kind of recruit throughout the year. They're a little bit more flexible with that, and they kind of add more roles as well, sort of thing. New Zealand companies tend to be later on in the year. They're not so fussed about locking people in early. There are exceptions, of course. The best thing you want to do is kind of just monitor it, keep track of all these different jobs and stuff like that. I use a spreadsheet. Some people use a Trello board, whatever makes you fancy. All right, we'll take one more question, and then if you have any more questions for me, feel free to stay back. But pizza is also ready as well.
Sorry, just super quick.
Yeah.
I noticed last year there was a lot less graduate role jobs than normal, and that's what a lot of people have been telling me as well. Do you reckon that's going to be better this year?
I mean, obviously last year with COVID, it was not ideal and stuff like that. A lot of companies preemptively cut their grad roles and internships because they weren't sure what was going to happen. Tech is one of those nice industries you don't really have to worry about. You can work remotely. So I wouldn't worry about it too much this year. It might be slightly less than normal. I mean, Ab, you can talk about it. Recruitment and everything like that is definitely not dying too much.
Yeah, so what happened,
it came back up.
what happened during COVID, we did take a dive, but very quickly it came back up. And the most important thing is for yourself to prepare for the fact that you want to be able to work remotely. And the way you present yourselves in your resumes and stuff is the ability to work remotely. As long as you can do that, there's no reason why you can't be hired. And there are a lot more roles now emerging in the market. And what's happened with COVID is it allows you to do global from New Zealand. So we are starting to see more and more overseas companies hiring remotely from here. So great roles as well.
Definitely, yeah, applying overseas and everything like that. So thank you everyone for coming tonight. Hope you learned something. Hope you got some takeaways. There are pizzas outside, pizza and drinks. Help yourself. Thank you. Basically, shirt sizes, and then essentially a way to contact them, like email, phone number, something like that. If you could take them down, there was that will get me looks like this one. Yeah, it's got like sorry, to answer your question. What's the city company?
Grab your email.
I think with the chemicals they have their own page.
Yeah, so with Amazon, I found I actually apply. They recruit really early, and they mention all the I only okay, yeah, so I wouldn't worry about it too much. As well, it's mentioned that they're all HR managers, collection managers, and this sort of thing. They're trying to still the guys. That's good.
Doing well at 220 is a good sign for it.
I have a whole bunch of
I think 320.
Maybe 7.2.
Does ramps up the difficulty a little bit.
I know.
You can't have to because they'll post and then a lot of these companies as well, they'll post get one into and then when they're interviewing them, they'll take it down. And then if that interview involves the interviews, they'll post it. Sorry, did you ask me a question? That's what I did.